Well, Brian, it's good to be here with you
here
today, and we're going to have an exciting session, and I thought I might set the stage. Prior to Brian being born, I wrote down this formula at Berkeley in 1965. And it was really to focus on the need for access to capital, and that you needed financial capital that served as a multiplier effect on the world's largest asset, human capital, social capital, and real assets. And today, we're going to focus particularly on these areas in a different way than you normally would be focused. Financial technology's changed a lot in the 53 years since I wrote down that formula. But today we're going to focus on the human capital of Vista Equity. And so we talk a lot of times about private equity. They control over 8,000 companies today, more than are listed. The Wilshire 5000 can't even find 5,000 companies anymore. There's only 36 or 3,700 companies in the Wilshire 5,000 today. And therefore, we're really focused on what does Vista Equities do better than anyone else? How have they been able to achieve these rates of return? And what does it mean when you have a technology or software firm to be owned by Vista? And also we're going to focus on the social capital, the culture of Vista and what they do differently from that. So let's start with a simple question, Brian. How do you measure success of this program?
Well, as many as that is, what we do is we actually start even before that. We have kind of an interesting model for talent acquisition. We have what we call a wide funnel. Jamie and I were talking about it earlier. So when we get these people, they often don't come from a software background. And so, which is great, because we recognize from our personality profiles that we've been doing for the last 20 years that they have a personality that should work very well for whatever it is that we've identified their job, whether it's systems engineering, hardcore development, architecture, sales. But we have to spend a lot of time teaching them about what it is that they're going to be doing. And the best way to start with that is helping them understand what it is that our customers do. So the first couple weeks are really, they go through a presentation understanding what the company's customers do, what it is that we do for them, how our products are built, why they're built differently than other companies' products, and then depending on what their functional area is, they spend a lot of time learning about what it is that they're going to be. So if they go into sales, they learn a lot about sales techniques, about why our sales compensation criteria is so different than maybe some of the other companies for which they've worked. I'm sure we'll touch on that later. If it's marketing, we spend a lot of time around data and analytics, why that's so important in marketing. If it's development, we talk about documentation, why it's so important, team building and development, which a lot of people don't spend enough time on, but at Vista it's very, very important. So over time, depending on the company, it's anywhere from 7 to 9 months that they've spent before they've done a day of work at the business.
So let's step back and kind of look at, first, what are the largest software firms in the world measured by their value? And so at the top of the list, we have Microsoft and Oracle and SAP and Adobe and so on. And what's interesting about this list today is that you have 3 game, we can call them video game, esports potentially, Nintendo, Electronic Arts, and Activision among the 10. So only Oracle, SAP, and Microsoft are larger than you in terms of a software firm today. How did you get there?
Well, we got very lucky. Which is very important for any entrepreneur. We focused on one thing early, which was software. And the reason why we focused on software back in 2000 and 99 when we were building the business was really based on value. You know, our view back then was, even though software was a much smaller component of the technology industry than semiconductors or hardware or data networking or storage, we thought it drove the value underlying all of those different industries. And so my partner Robert and I thought that software, in terms of its productivity value, was going to continue to be more and more important. And the other thing that we saw, which we don't always talk about, It certainly wasn't popular at the time. If you remember in '99, everyone was focused on the internet commerce aspect of this new great era of the web. And software, enterprise software at the time, was really a story around customization and delivering kind of at a place and time in situ. And we were really excited about the opportunity to maybe configure these businesses as opposed to customize them and then distribute them much cheaper. Because for any of us who remember, in the 90s, the most expensive aspect of software acquisition as a customer was actually the implementation, not the software itself.
Well, you know, it's interesting when you think about it. The percentage of the world's output that's digitized and goes up every year. So what products, services are moving digitally, and as we look at medical and the many other areas, we're going to see that play out here. And as I mentioned to Brian, that to me software was the central nervous system. Now, in the old days with SAP and Oracle, it was so painful putting that nervous system in that it almost destroyed your company just putting it in. Just the thought of ever taking it out was so painful you didn't want to do that, and all of a sudden we have the idea that you can be operational in a day on Salesforce with Mark and others that grew up. But the importance of this, and I don't know how many people in the audience ever saw one of those Matrix movies, Matrix 1, 2, or 3, okay, fine. Well, if you saw that movie, you should have invested in software because you saw that it took the humans and the machines to team up to compete with software. And when you look at evaluations of, quote, manufacturers of physical product versus software, it's a lot different. And when you talk about cash flow, talk to us a little bit. You know, so many people are focused on valuations as a multiple of EBITDA. So today, with Kroger stock dropping in March here of 2018, when we were at the conference today, people say, gosh, Kroger's selling at 6 times EBITDA, but it's selling at 24 times free cash flow. And so you really need to focus on what is the free cash flow, and tell us about free cash flow at a software company.
You know, the thing about the software industry is it's exciting. It's about growth. I mean, we're at the Montgomery conference. You got some of the fastest growing, coolest companies here. But it's also, because of the legacy businesses that you mentioned, tremendously sticky. And all of the things that made software sticky, the implementation time, the training, the workflow, is now being helped along in this next generation of companies by these machines that you just talked about. So for implementation, for example, one of the most exciting areas around getting software to work inside of companies is the way in which people are trained and the way in which the software is implemented. And we buy software companies that do that. So in 2000, I never thought we'd own software companies that would help our software companies implement and train our own software, but that's exactly what's going on. And the cash flow characteristics of these businesses in this next generation of technology and software are actually better than they used to be. Because if you build these companies in what they used to call service-oriented architectures, but these cloud-based SaaS businesses, you have a much better sense of how your customers are using your products. So over time, it becomes candidly cheaper to keep up with customer demand as it relates to product innovation.
Evan, one of the exciting things about coming to a Montgomery conference is, one, these exciting firms that are changing the world and getting a chance to meet them. But the other thing is there's a lot of entrepreneurs. And so let's address the entrepreneurs that are with us today, either watching this or in the audience. Talk about the challenges you faced in scaling Vista itself.
Sure. One of the things that I think ultimately benefited my partner and myself is we didn't know what we didn't know. We were investment bankers. We were public school kids, so to speak. We looked up to the disruptors of finance, the biggest one being Mike, who kind of created the democratization of finance so we could actually build a company like Vista. But it was a challenge early on to recruit great operators to come work for Vista, not to run our companies, not to be entrepreneurs in residence, but to actually just work with us full-time, just helping make our companies better. And so we defaulted to people that we knew, which I think a lot of entrepreneurs do. And luckily, two of the people we knew have turned out to be two of the greatest software operators on the planet, Martin Taylor, who used to be Steve Ballmer's chief of staff, and Betty Hung, who was the CFO of a great software company called OSI Soft. And the two of them created this core, VCG, which is now 110 people. And it was really them, candidly, Mike. I wish Robert and I could take the credit, but it was Betty, who, if those of you who know her know how charismatic she is, and Martin, who were able to kind of recruit this group of people to do something that hadn't really been done before. They're not EIRs. They're not going to go work for our companies. They've been successful operators. Like most successful operators, they kind of, are a little contemptuous of consultants. They certainly don't think finance people know anything about operations, and so they helped us build that expertise. And it was the scaling of that group, which I think more than anything else contributed to the success of Vista.
And I think to underline that point, there are some periods in history, I would tell you the 1970s particularly, where that financial part was a core in building a business and could, in fact, how you finance the company drive half the value. There are other periods of time, much more recently, such as today, where the operational element in your consulting team of 100 people in operations really is how you're driving value. And I think it might be very interesting looking, how do you approach and evaluate companies at different stages in their growth? How do you evaluate the founders, executive teams? And how do you work, I think, when you become part of the Vista family, how do you work with those founders or CEOs once you become the largest stockholder of the company?
The types of founders who love to work with Vista are ones who have a tremendous amount of faith in their companies, first and foremost. And so they've gotten to a point in their lives where either from a competitive standpoint, they're ready to acquire some other businesses to take them to the next level, and they need capital for that. Or they've gotten to a point where just for their own family's diversification, it makes a lot of sense for them to sell at least part of the business. Or there's some generational event going on in the ownership of the company, and the next generation of the family doesn't want to continue to run it the way the founder did. And what they all see, though, is rather than selling to a strategic, which is traditionally how software companies find their liquidity, they have in Vista a partner who spend all day, every day, thinking about operational performance and excellence in software. And that's really the thing that makes us unique. And because we're so excited when we meet with founders, because it's almost impossible to replicate the passion, the domain expertise, the accountability of a founder, we love partnering with founders that are willing to kind of work with us and helping them see how we've done this 311 times. And at the same time, they teach us a lot about what we're not doing well. And so our best practices, our Vista best practices, the white papers that you know well, half of them come from the folks that we buy, and they come in and say, you know what, you guys think you're really good at territory-based alignment of your salespeople, but let me, Reggie, at Cvent, teach you how we do it, because we have a lot better productivity.
Well, I noticed your CEO at Cvent said he's going to add at least 10 or 12 new. And I think one of the things I've been encouraging, we have a company that was built over a lot of years called Berkshire Hathaway. Didn't pay a dividend, sheltered a lot of their earnings through insurance, raised capital kind of through an insurance also. And one of the things that struck me is that you've built the fourth largest software firm in the world today. And by you taking the best practices of the founders, plus your own processing systems, why haven't you created a company that we could all invest in rather than hold them in the traditional private equity?
We're having this conversation in front of everyone, Mike. This is something Mike talks to Robert and I about a lot. The downside of private equity is that, there are timing aspects to it. While for most investors are pretty good, we get to hold these companies for 10 years. For something like Berkshire Hathaway, they have the opportunity to take a much longer view. So the things that you pointed out to us that should have been more obvious to Robert and myself is that there's so much value not so much in the financial synergy of us owning all these software companies, but the intellectual synergy. So one of the things that we do at Vista, and I know there are some people who have worked with Vista before, we get our people together a lot. For example, last week in Miami, we had 500 people from our 48 companies from the sales marketing track. We had what we called our go-to-market best practice sharing summit. So those VCG folks do that, they put it on. Then we have folks from the companies come out and do case studies of how this has worked for them. And then the second half of the second day, we pair people up by function across companies so they can share experiences and have VCG work with them on the things that maybe, if they're newer companies, they haven't seen before. And then on the third day, we get the companies the folks from the companies back together again. So if there's 10 folks from each company, they sit down at their own table and they work on one of these case studies. We do this every month across every functional area of the company. And then we also have our CXO summits multiple times a year where we get the senior management of our companies together. And several years ago, it struck them that they had never, I think at the time we had 35 companies, the CEO who had run several software companies had never had an opportunity to interact with 34 other like-minded, highly qualified, highly motivated CEOs in kind of a penalty-free environment. And that is really the value that we provide beyond just the tools and the focus and the capital and the commitment is really that network of folks who are there for one another and share their best practices. And that's why you see the fancy metrics around Vista's growth and profitability post-acquisition. A lot of it comes from just bringing all these great minds together and sharing
Fine,
ideas.
so let me just kind of summarize this point. You know, I have been encouraging you, as you've told the group and anyone watching on the web today, because unlike, let's say, Berkshire Hathaway, the companies are actively made better through this process, rather than investing in Coca-Cola and letting it run, or Wells Fargo or something. And just if I have a company and I'm selling part of it to you, you're going to try to empower me and I'm going to try to empower you. I want to switch for a moment here. It was 1972. I was in New York, and one day I looked around and I had a visitor, and they told me, are you aware that 60% of the employees in your department are women? I told them, I didn't really think about that. From that standpoint. It just evolved, and I'm speaking professional. So I know 2 of your 5 funds today are led by women. What have you done about recruiting a diverse workforce in this sense?
You know, I think sadly we haven't been deliberate enough about it, but our testing methodology, because we don't look for people from a certain school, a certain region, a certain area. We don't allow our companies to recruit based on familiarity. The one thing you could say maybe we force them to do is when they think about recruiting and talent management and talent acquisition, they have to go broad. And when you go broad and you do it on a blind basis, so I didn't mention that earlier, so when people take the test, we get the results blindly, so we don't know if it's a man or a woman.
Ryan, you might be too young, but there was this cartoon when the internet got started. And it was a dog at a terminal and said, you know, the thing I like about the internet is they don't know I'm a dog. Okay? So we're going to check who else can apply here for this test.
And we really focus on just the quality of the applicant. And I think that's a big reason why we get this more diverse pool. And then, like everything else, and I think this is so important because my partner is African American, he talks about access to capital. You know, opportunity is very important. Results are very important too. And you have to focus on the number of people in any different demographic that you have in an organization because cultural familiarity is really important. So if 10% of your company is women, it's going to be really hard to attract great women because there are a lot of great companies that are much more thoughtful around creating a culture that's great for women. You're going to lose applicants to them. And so it's self-reinforcing. So as you mentioned, you know, Renee and KJ, Christina, run 2 of our funds, but Betty Hung is very involved in this. Christine Pastori, who's our number 2 in IR. We have a lot of very senior women at Vista, and they spend a lot of time promoting this idea that it's not just meritocracy, which is what Robert and I always want to talk about, but it's creating an environment and creating cultural familiarity that will attract certain types of candidates. And so I think, again, we're not good enough yet. We're 35. We should be 50. But we are opening our eyes, I think, as a lot of people in tech.
So as we leave that part of the discussion, I really want to stress, when you want to build something that's going to last, it's a question of building a culture. And Brian, you and Robert have built a great culture. So I'd like to switch to another area. So you've become one of the leading conservationists of our time. In fact, there's a new species named after you. Can you give us like 15 or 30 seconds on this new species?
Well, I was really honored. My friend, Dr. Russ Mittermeier, is probably the world's expert on lemurs, and so they discovered this new species of lemur, and he sent me a note, and he said, Brian, thank you so much for all you've done from a donation standpoint and fundraising. We'd like to name the species after you. I said, that's amazing. I said, what is it? He said, it's a dwarf lemur. Now, there's a couple hundred different species of lemur. They're amazing animals. They're only based in Madagascar. There's only a couple dwarf lemurs, and as you might figure from the name, they are the smallest of the lemurs. So I'm not quite sure if Russ was trying to tell me something, but I was honored nonetheless. And it is a cute little guy.
So a couple weeks ago in February of 2018, we hosted about 60 or 70 of the world's leading philanthropists in the area of conservation, and whether we're focused on the oceans or the challenges of air quality or eliminating factory farming or using the new technologies or on food production to reduce releasing in the air, and all these issues centered. And Brian hosted everyone here in Los Angeles just a few weeks ago, and it was very interesting when Jane Goodall addressed us. She commented that a lot of people are committed 1 day a year, 2 days a year, 3 days, but she had commented, and then in all of her experience, which in her case has spanned 6 decades, Brian, she's never met anyone who's had the commitment to you to this area. And I really want to commend you on that. Why did you and how did you get interested in it?
It sounds very dispassionate, and I know you've heard this story before, so you've encouraged me to use more heart in talking about it, but it was kind of a data exercise. Robert and I were very lucky. We and our partners, some of whom are here, had a lot of early success. Go figure, investing in software turned out to be a good idea. And it was my 30th birthday, and I said, my son had just been born, and I said, my legacy to him can't just be the financial success of what we've done. And my parents, even though we didn't have any money growing up, were very charitable, maybe not philanthropic, but charitable in the way that they spent their time and volunteered. And so I spent a lot of time focusing on different areas that were of interest to me. And it kept, when I was looking at many of the world's problems, so many of them kept coming back to the degradation of the environment. And so then I put my investor hat on and said, well, where can I make the biggest impact? And the World Bank had done a study that the rate of return on dollars invested to protect and preserve our natural world gets greater than 100x return. So I said, okay.
Let's just, while you're talking, let's put up a slide of some of those areas in the world that you have focused on.
So we spend a lot of time in areas that touch on all these things. And sidebar, if you're going to be serious, many people in this room are going to sell their companies and make a lot of money. And as soon as you get serious about how you want to make a difference outside of your business work and are going to get committed to philanthropy, go straight to Mike Milken and his Center for Strategic Philanthropy. There are a lot of people who've given a lot of money away. There's only one person who's dedicated a very significant amount of his time to thinking about how to do it in the most effective way, and that's Mike and his team. And through his help and through the work that we've done, we now touch on a lot of things here. We're known for tropical forests. That's kind of the work that we do because we focus on biodiversity, because we think that it's one of the most important things that
Maybe we can get a map that just shows kind of those areas also.
We focus on what are called the hotspots, the key biodiversity areas on the planet. So over the last 4 billion years, we've developed a lot of life on the planet. But interestingly, from a flora and fauna standpoint, a lot of it, most of it, is centered around this band, this equatorial band that we see in maps of the world and around the globe. And that's where our work is done. And sadly, there's a lot of work to be done because those are in countries oftentimes where there are a lot of different inhibitors to preserving the environment, and there are a lot of competing interests, oftentimes short-term interests that supersede the long-term preservation of the planet.
So in closing, Brian, since I thought I might just comment. Last week I went and saw a documentary you'll all be able to see later this month on the National Geographic on this strange rock. It made me think so much of your work. And it starts with a dust storm in the northwest Africa in the Sahara Desert, and those particles pass over the Atlantic Ocean, landing in South America, particularly northern Brazil, touching Peru, Bolivia, and go down and provide the nutrients for the plants. Then they go up in the leaves into the air, and it's all taken. The story is told by astronauts from outer space. And you can't see really the Amazon because there's a river of water in the air. As the water goes back into and evaporates, that travels over, hits the Andes Mountains, and then goes down into the Pacific Ocean and eventually goes around the world. And this is really the lungs of the world. So 60% of all the oxygen we breathe, and you wonder why. And when you think about what astronauts have told us who've gone out of space and looked back at Earth, this unique planet, Alan Shepard here, this blue planet in the universe. And Brian, I thought maybe we could close with this little video piece from your foundation about global wildlife. And I just want to thank you for everyone on the planet for your work in this area. And let's take a look at that video.
I appreciate it, Mike.
Thank you.
Our home is the only planet in the universe known to sustain life. Over 2 million species of animals, plants, and microorganisms, crafted over millennia, form the theatres of life that we call ecosystems. From tropical rainforests to coral reefs, grasslands to desert, rivers to mangroves, to ocean. These are the heartbeat, veins and lungs of our planet, the wellspring from which we draw everything, from fresh water to clean air, crop pollination to climate stabilization, artistic inspiration to emotional well-being and happiness. We need the symphony of life not just to survive, but to thrive. And yet, we are wringing this life out of our planet, losing species at a rate unseen since the dinosaurs disappeared 66 million years ago. Forests once alive with the chirps and chuckles of birds and monkeys have, in our lifetime, fallen silent. Vast plains, once boulevards for rhinos and elephants, lie empty as we pillage majestic animals for body parts. Mountains, stripped of forests, turn rivers once clear as glass into brown sludge. We are depriving our children the chance to experience true wilderness, all in the name of progress. We at Global Wildlife Conservation believe in a different kind of progress. We believe in a progress that embraces biodiversity as the fabric of life. the underpinning of all that really truly matters. The greatest gift we can leave future generations is the diversity of life on this planet. Once lost, it cannot be recreated. Just as we have the power to wipe out our fellow creatures, we have the capacity to save them.
Thanks for playing that, Mike.